where you're only really just starting to ease into the rehab, my legs, there were muscles just starting to awaken, and each time I was assessed, there would be a little bit more starting to happen.
Andrew Leslie's our guest. A year it's been since this crash while riding his bike off-road on Wellington's very popular Makara Peak. A year later, he walked into the studio, but at the stage we're at now, he has been diagnosed a tetraplegic and is in the early stages of his rehab, 26 minutes past 10. Let's pick up from this stage. So you go to Burwood, there's some flickers of movement. I want to talk about the physical of the rehab, but what was going on again mentally as you began the rehab? Was it up and down, dark moments of, hey, my legs moved? What was the journey?
Yeah, absolutely up and down. The days were very busy, so you had a focus, and that was Monday to Friday. Your full-time job was rehab. But nighttime was when your mind started to go down into these different tangents.
Yeah, who's going live? Just out of interest.
We're all feeding it back live to our, and I think it's like on our website.
Right.
Yeah, as well. Yeah.
You can't keep tabs on it now.
Yeah. So you are
And probably
live.
on Radio New Zealand too, eh?
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
right, even on Radio Live Visions. Right?
I've got some.
Just checking that you're all okay.
I think they might just need one more. We just never have cultural ministers, you see. Minister Pathway was on minute early yesterday as well.
Oh.
It shocks us, it throws us all.
It's our enthusiasm.
Yeah.
You're right. Look, kia ora, and thank you very much for coming this morning. The export of livestock from New Zealand has been a feature of our farming systems for a long time. Changes were made in 2008 to halt the export of livestock for slaughter. Since that time, there has been a steady flow of exports for breeding purposes. But concerns about the risk to New Zealand's reputation from this trade have been steadily increasing. We began the 2019 livestock export review to look at what options were available to address the risks to our reputation. We received a lot of feedback from that review, including from our independent National Animal Welfare Advisory Committee, who recommended the trade stop. The tragic sinking of the Gulf Livestock 1 ship in 2020 brought the dangers to a head, and we introduced a temporary ban on livestock exports, while the Heron Review recommended improvements to our system. Although many of these have been implemented, there remains an ongoing level of concern with the welfare of these animals while at sea for up to 3 weeks. Over recent years, we've seen some of the reports from these ships, many of which are not designed for live exports, where conditions on board have led to many adverse animal welfare outcomes. The fact is that once animals leave New Zealand by sea, we have very limited ability to ensure their well-being before they reach their destination. That's why this morning we're announcing that the export of livestock by sea will cease following a transition period of up to 2 years. At the heart of our decision is upholding New Zealand's reputation for high standards in animal welfare. New Zealand must stay ahead of the curve in a world where animal welfare is under increasing scrutiny if we truly want to be the most ethical producers of food. While New Zealand has only been a small part of the global livestock trade, I acknowledge that it has been able to generate additional revenue for some farmers. But ultimately, we aren't able to guarantee the welfare of these animals at sea, and that is an unacceptable risk to New Zealand's reputation. The transition period of up to 2 years will allow affected businesses, both in New Zealand and around the world, the time to wind down their trade and adjust their operations. This is a complex process to unwind, so the final exact length of the transition period will be determined pending further advice from the Ministry for Primary Industries. I've also asked NPI to provide advice on possible improvements to animal welfare on ships during the transition period. I want to thank everybody who took part in the wider review process. I'm now happy to answer some questions.
Minister, are you comfortable with letting this carry on for another 2 years?
We appreciate that there's an existing trade. We have, a system in New Zealand that has been built around the export, and it's only fair that we offer them time to transition out.
You talk about fairness though, but when we're talking about animal welfare issues, it's like saying this is terrible, but we're going to let you ease out of it.
No, we've done a lot to improve the standards on ships as best we can. Ultimately, it's the risk to our reputation of an ongoing trade. That's why we're ending it.
Isn't that risky though, letting it carry on for another 2 years when we know about the risks and we know what happens?
Look, we do accept that there's risks on every shipment that goes out. We've done our best to minimise those. We do not accept that we can accept that over time, but we do have to allow a transition period for industry.
You said that there was a risk to New Zealand's reputation. Have you come under pressure from other governments to cease this practice?
No, you'll see that there's a lot of public pressure here and a lot of concern. In fact, I speak to farmers up and down this country, over half of whom I would speak to who would be concerned about this.
Exporters have warned that China will be upset and may retaliate. Are you concerned about China's response at all?
This is not about China, it's about animal welfare and New Zealand's reputation.
But they're the main people who take our live exports, so is there concern there about it's a $500 million industry?
It's not about China, it's about animal welfare. We have a mature relationship with them. I'm sure they understand our position that we want to uphold our reputation to ensure that everything that we trade is from an ethical base.
In terms of the animal welfare, isn't this a factor though that it's part of the provenance of New Zealand's export trade that you can't have bad animal welfare and try and sell to top markets?
Look, we're moving as an industry across the sectors to try and move from volume to values. That is, that the values that underpin everything that we produce are the best in the world. And this one area of animal welfare is an area where we have to move on and ensure that not just on farm, but if there's any transportation issues, that we uphold the highest standards.
If these animals aren't going overseas, will that result in more bobby calves being produced, or possibly a bobby calf problem?
Look, it'll be up to the farmers, and many of them will grow these animals out and they'll be processed in the normal way through the farming systems, and they will be valuable export revenue.
Is this also in terms of the dairy industry, we're looking at winding down the dairy industry, is this going to actually accelerate that, because you're not going to then be able to move those animals, which are basically heifers, they're not bulls, they're simply heifers, breeding stock? Will that see a decline, or be a decline in moving down that dairy platform?
We're not looking to wind down the dairy industry at all. We're wanting to have good utilisation of the animals, good protection of our environment, and farmers on their own farms are often in the best position to work out, what are the animals and how do they stock their farms.
The other question is this transition almost a de facto compensation for those who are already got significant assets in terms of quarantining these animals and of planning the whole thing? So, I mean, it's a wind down effect. If you've got to plan, say, 2 years for cattle, is that really what it's about?
Look, we understand there's significant investment in some operations within New Zealand to provide animals and transport them to the ships, but ultimately that whole trade puts us at risk the minute they go on the ship, and that's what we don't believe is sustainable.
Why is it in New Zealand's best interest to send cattle overseas? Aren't we effectively just setting up industries over there that then compete with our own?
Look, that's been an argument put forward by many farmers, and but we've encouraged trade. People are innovative and they take up opportunities, but we reach a point where our reputation is at risk, and so we have to make the changes.
The Animal Genetics Trade Association has said that this is an ill-informed, massively consequential decision for the nation to earn short-term political brownie points for a few activists. What's your response to that?
Look, I expect their reaction will be something like that, but look, we've had information, we've had opinions from people through 2 reviews, the Heron one and the one before that, and ultimately if you go to the National Animal Welfare Advisory Committee that is independent, they said in conclusion they think the trade should stop.
Who are the key trading partners that you've spoken to, and what were their individual reactions?
We haven't had any reactions at this point. We notified Australia and we notified China.
Does the ban apply to air as well, considering that, for instance, goats, they've flown to China or South Korea?
No, it does not apply to any animals moved by air. Clearly, the periods are far shorter, and generally they're well looked after.
You don't have any welfare concerns about animals?
We've not had any indications of animal welfare concerns of movement of animals by air, and clearly horses are the biggest part of that. They're very well looked after.
Minister, what's the hit to the Kiwis' GDP by not continuing practice? And conversely, do you think you can make more money through the reputational side of things? There's value adds in other areas.
Look, I don't think there'll be a hit to GDP. Clearly, there's direct exports of around 250 million. It's been ramped up from an average of 60 million a year to 250. There's been a bit of a gold rush in the last year, but those animals will stay here within New Zealand. And as I say, our reputation to be the most ethical producers of livestock protein in the world is something that we're working to build value from. And I think we can, and I think this will actually play positively into our international reputation.
What reporting that you informed the Chinese embassy a couple of weeks ago, did that happen?
No, we've informed our Chinese trading partners. Officials have done that. I haven't spoken to anyone, and we're awaiting response.
Do you know when they were informed?
No, I'm not clear on that.
This is going to come at a cost to farmers. What support for them is there at the moment?
Look, they will still have their animals. The 2-year transition period will mean that farmers have a heads up. So if they're going to put the bulls out to the cows, they know that there won't be the option of exporting any of those offspring. And so that's a good reason to have that transition period.
And the exact length of that time you've said is still pending advice. Does that give those farmers enough certainty?
Look, we hopefully by the end of May we'll have a date on that, but I'm waiting for advice from MPI in terms of the regulatory changes that we'll need to put in place.
What have farmers been saying to you about it?
Look, over the last few years, I've had mixed views on this. Some, like my brother, who's utilised it, thinks it's good, but has concerns as well. And I talk to many farmers, particularly some of the wives who have raised some of these animals. They don't like the idea that they are being exported and often onto ships that, they have very little control over the animal welfare standard.
To retain the confidence of farmers?
Yes.
And also, just one other question: have you had any advice that you could be breaching any trade treaties?
No, the WTO rules allow for interventions on animal welfare issues, and it's great.
If you look at
the
John
point about
Olsen's
the communication with China, MPI delivered a letter to the Chinese embassy on the 31st of March.
I understand that they had been notified, and that is important that they were given a heads up.
By a letter to the Chinese embassy on the 31st of March.
Yes.
In terms of what John Holston was saying last night, that he thought that the animals were not going to good places. I mean, we've seen Fonterra close down its farms now in China. Is that sort of an indication, is that one of the factors involved in this? Because we've seen Fonterra 10 years ago make a big fuss about opening their farms, they've now closed them. Is there any relationship between that?
There's absolutely no connection. This has been an animal welfare assessment from our original review through to the Heron report, and the conclusion that actually we can't sustain the ongoing risk to our reputation when we can't control the conditions.
So that reporting back that was being done back in 2019, where the exporters were expected to report back within the first month that they'd been in China, did you find that there were big issues there?
There's been mixed feedback on that, and I didn't receive sufficient assurance to know that actually we'd made huge progress in this area.
So was it more that they weren't actually reporting back, or was that the reporting back?
It's a bit of both.
Okay.
Have you ever seen an impact of the reputational risk you're talking about? Has someone overseas or some other trade minister from another country just told you about this?
No, they haven't. No, this has been our initiative, our appreciation that our reputation is very, very important, particularly when it comes to the production and the exporting of livestock protein. And we have to be the most ethical producers in the world to get the premiums that we need to run viable farming operations.
And what would be your message to other countries and governments that are still exporting live animals?
That's up to them to make their calls.
But you've talked about how it's going to damage our reputation if we continue doing it. Do you think that there's a concern that other countries doing it, there might be a similar reputational hit?
That's for them to make judgment. Thank you very much. Appreciate that. Wonderful.
Thank you, Minister.